afternoon, everybody. So as people are slowly filtering in, so let me try to introduce Professor Motta. So Massimo is a university professor is a research professor at the Universitat Pompeu Fabra. He's done research on pretty much every topic that we competition economists are interested in. So, horizontal mergers, predation, extraordinary practices, and so on and so forth. He's the author of 2 books. And of course, he's also chief economist or chief competition economist at the European Commission from 2013 to 2016. So he also knows a thing or two about the real world. Yeah. So Massimo is going to talk to us about self-preferencing and foreclosure by digital platforms. So Massimo, the floor is yours for 1 hour, and then we have 15 minutes for Q&As.
Thanks, Nicola. Good afternoon, and well, thank you very much for staying here until the last session. Thanks for the invitation to Nicola and everybody at MaCCI. So indeed, I'm going to talk about fears of harm for foreclosure cases in digital markets. So in terms of disclosure, I have not worked for firms on these cases. I've worked when I was at the European Commission on the Google shopping case, and this is basically the only case in which I was being involved. I should also say up front that I know these cases basically just from the public information which is provided. And since some of these cases are ongoing, this means that very often there is very little information, sometimes just a press release or little more than that. So, I do not know all the facts, and these might matter. So I think that don't need to be convinced that there are things which have been happening in the digital markets for quite some while. And there have been competition agencies which have opened abuse of dominance investigation. Probably one of the first ones, if not the first one, was the Google shopping case done by the European Commission. Arguably, this is what, and that's been said also in the previous panel, this is also what has shaped part, at least, of the DMA, these sort of cases, which, in my opinion, is one reason why we might want to be interested in understanding a little bit better these cases. Some of these types of practices will continue to interest antitrust agencies in the future in Europe, but of course also elsewhere where there is not the DMA. My interest on this topic also comes from the fact that abuse of dominance or monopolization practices is something which is quite controversial, both in academia and in practice. So we know very well that, for instance, the way in which in the US and in Europe the courts have been dealing with these issues is quite different. Also, in particular, when it comes to big tech, some of the commentators, some paid, some maybe not, are arguing that it doesn't make a lot of sense to think of anti-competitive practices when it comes to industries where, say, consumers are paying zero price, or innovation is going to continuously happen, etc. So why should we look at this type of practices? And what I'm trying to do is to propose some anti-competitive rationale for some of the practices that antitrust agencies have been looking at in the recent past. Here, and without no attempt to do something which is exhaustive, I am indicating some of the cases which have been investigated by different antitrust authorities around the world. So some of them have been cases, involving Google, some Apple, some Amazon and Facebook. So here you have a list of cases. I'm classifying them according to 3 different types of theories of harm. I will be a little bit more specific later. So, but what is important is that I'm going to focus basically on situations in which there is foreclosure in adjacent markets. So we are typically, what we are thinking of, a situation in which there is a platform which is vertically integrated, or it is active and integrated in complementary markets, and I might want to foreclose a company which is a rival into the other activity that it is taking. So when we talk about foreclosure, I think a useful starting point is the Chicago School critique. And this has been a starting point for economists for a very long time, and probably, unfortunately, still the arrival point for judges in the US. They have not gone much further than that. So, but I think it's a good way to start, because I think at least the way in which I look at how to organize what are possible theories of harm for foreclosure cases is to start with this and to see, what has been the departure, what is the departure from the Chicago School assumptions, and this helps understanding what is the rationalization of certain practices. So this is basically our, a picture that I will show you with in different sources. But what happens is that there is a firm which is integrated. Here, you can think of it as a firm which is vertically integrated, but as I said, it could be, a complement. It doesn't really matters. The economics of it is basically the same. And the question is, would this vertically integrated company, which has a monopolistic position upstream, say, will have an incentive to exclude this downstream rival? So that is basically the question that we are dealing with. And the Chicago School and the one monopoly profit theory said, no, there is no incentive to exclude this company. Of course, there is the ability to exclude the downstream rival, because given that this is an essential input, if the vertically integrated company decides not to supply this input to the downstream rival, then the downstream rival will not be able to operate in the industry, but there will be no incentive to do so. And there will be no incentive to do so simply because you are going to make more money by keeping this company in the market and then extracting through appropriate pricing choices, extracting the rents from this company. And this is one of the good starting points, because basically you need some flexibility in the terms of the pricing that you can use to extract the rents from this company here. Okay, so the idea basically is that by having the rival downstream in the market, you expand the pie of profits that you can make from this market. And as long as you have enough flexibility in the pricing, then you can suck out all the rents, or most of the rents from this company. And that is much better than simply, deciding not to supply this company anymore, because this would reduce the size of the pie. So this is the idea, and basically, the Chicago School proponents themselves, knew as a sort of, it was a corollary. What we are saying is that if there were situations in which there were restrictions to pricing, then what happens is that rent extraction might be limited, and therefore, in that case, there might be an incentive by the vertically integrated firm to indeed exclude the downstream rival. So for instance, situations in which you have sector regulation and the regulator is imposing a caps or imposing other restrictions on the pricing that the vertically integrated firm can charge on the downstream rival, will be potentially situations in which you might have an incentive to exclude. And perhaps it is by no coincidence that many of the cases of foreclosure that we have seen in Europe, and which the European Commission and other national competition authorities have intervened, were cases in regulated industries. Just think, for instance, of all the stream of cases in telecoms at the moment in which we were the former public incumbent, France Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, Telefonica, etc., which we are getting active also downstream with broadband services, and they were excluding in different ways or trying to exclude downstream rivals also active in these broadband services. And this will be my starting point with one of the first categories of theories of harm that I'm going to mention, that is that there might be situations in digital markets in which, by the very choice of the business model which is chosen by the vertically integrated firm or by the platforms, what happens is that there will be a limit to the possibility to extract rents. And I will mention in particular the cases involving Google, where I will argue that the main limitations in rent extraction was due to the fact that Google was using a business model whereby it was imposing zero price of access, and all the monetizations instead is done on the advertising side. And then I will also spend a couple of words to talk about other cases in which perhaps the limitation is due to the fact that there is not discrimination in the terms of access, and this might limit the possibility of rent extraction, and therefore it might give incentive to exclude. Okay, so and that's basically what I plan to do, that is to try and talk about a few cases among those that I have mentioned in the previous slides. And I'll say, well, that a category of cases is one in which the theory of harm is related to imperfect rent extraction. And then I will talk also about cases in which the Chicago School assumption or the model is static in terms, and when you start to look at also how things can change in the future, then things might be different, and again you might have an incentive to exclude. That is what I call dynamic vertical foreclosure. And then, if time allows, I will briefly talk about another and the last theory of harm, or the last category of theory of harm, which is raising rivals' cost. Okay, let me start with Google Shopping. So Google Shopping is this case in which what happened was that you can think of it, you can interpret what happened there as a situation in which having the possibility to be included, to be listed in the organic search of on the Google search engine page was very important, or was essential, call it as you want, for comparison shopping services. So here we are talking about a situation in which, by and large, you have to think of the following way in which consumers were buying. And probably at the time, what happens is that the vast majority of people were buying it this way. Maybe today is a little bit different, but remember that the conduct at issue is a conduct which started in 2008. So what happened is that there was a number of comparison shopping services website which were offering, as the word is saying, the possibility to users to compare different alternatives for certain products. So the idea is that a consumer, what she would do is, interested in, I don't know, buying, running shoes, then they would enter in their search bar price running shoes. And then what happens is that in the search engine results page of Google, you would have a list of organic links to companies, could be Zalando, could be price.com, etc., which were offering these comparison shopping services. And then if you click on one of those, then what happens is that you end up in the page of these websites where different offers from different merchants are going to be advertised, and then from there you would choose the one that you want, and then you eventually, if you are happy, you will buy. So this is basically what we are talking about. And what happens was that Google was not involved in this market, but at some point they decided that it would be a good idea to try and enter this market, because they perceived that there was a lot of profits potentially to be made, but basically they were not monetizing anything unless they would be in this market as well. So what happened is that at some point they entered the market with their own service, which at the time was called Frugal. And Frugal basically didn't have much success. So what happens is that the algorithm of Google was placing Frugal in page 5 or 6 or 7, and basically it was a failure. And also from documentary evidence of the case, you can see that the managers were really unhappy. The managers of Google were very unhappy about Frugal. And so at some point, what you see is that they say, okay, so we are interested in this market. There is one way in which we can try to make an indent in this market, which is to use the power that we have in Google search. And so what happens is that they basically do two things. One is first of all, they decided, to close Frugal and to do a better job in their own comparison shopping service, which at the beginning was called Google Product Search, and then later on was called Google Shopping. But especially what they decided to do was to use their search engine to promote their own service. And so what they did was that they decided, when it came to Google's own service, basically, the algorithm would not, would not rank Google on the basis of merit, but quite simply what they did was to put it in a much more prominent position. So this clearly helped. And then later on, what happens also is that they do a change in the algorithm. And the change in the algorithm was presumably in order to penalize all websites which were not offering original content, and comparison shopping websites by their own nature would not offer original content. So what happened is that after the change in the algorithm, basically most of these comparison shopping services sites basically disappear from the site of people. They start to appear in page 3, on page 4, page 5, and basically they disappear from the site of people. Just taking into account that people basically, and there are lots of statistics about that. Basically, when you have a list of results, roughly 1/3 of the links go to the very first one in the first page. The second one gets between 15 and 20%, and then down, down, and down. And basically, when you arrive at the last one at the page is about 1%, and almost nobody goes to page 2, page 3. So if you start to be, not on the first page, already means that you are basically demoted, and you are not appearing in the first page, basically to people at all. Okay, so what is important here is that the European Commission took issue with the fact that Google didn't submit itself to the same rules as the other. That is, European Commission said, okay, if you thought that it was a good idea to demote all the websites which were not offering original content, fine, you could have done that, but you have not submitted yourself to the same rule. So what happened was that Google Shopping or Google Product Search, whatever it was called at the time, continued to appear, in a very prominent position there. This is what basically the Commission says, and this is what is called the self-preferencing, a term which was, I think, used in the first time in this particular case. Okay, so and in terms of theory of harm, so here you can see that the incentive to exclude comes from the very business model that Google has chosen, because what happened is that Google was not charging consumers for the whatever appeared on their page, and was not charging the comparison shopping services either. In the organic links, nobody has to pay for that. So what happens is that, seeing that they could not monetize, what they do is basically to, introduce their own service and basically promote it on top of the others. And in this way, basically, they have drastically reduced the variety and basically eliminated the competition. So this is a possible theory of harm. There is also another possible theory of harm, which has not been emphasized a lot in the decision, but it's one that you could see also in some of the documents of the time, which was the following fact. Okay, there is the risk that today people come to the search engine page, and then from there, they are going to move to price.com or whatever it is. Then tomorrow again, they come to the Google search page, and then only later they go to price.com. But the third or the fourth time, they might go directly to price.com if they have been, or whatever, the relevant comparison shopping service, and therefore they would bypass completely the Google shopping, the Google search engine. So there is this risk of disintermediation, which probably was one of the things that they were afraid of. In this particular case, Google ran a number of arguments to justify what they were doing. Among other things, well, they said that the Google search was not indispensable. They said that basically what they were doing was an innovation. The General Court didn't accept those arguments. Let's see if Google has more success with the Court of Justice. I forget to say one thing, that is that here I'm going to give a very informal presentation. I have a paper which is associated with this, and in the paper there are formalizations. And one of the things that I'm doing in a model which is inspired by this case is to show that even if this was not an indispensable input, so for instance, if there, or at least not for everybody, that is, if there was a group of consumers who are going to buy in a different way, that is, they might go directly to the comparison shopping services, then it is true that this type of behavior would be anti-competitive. So this was the Google shopping case. There is a case which shares some similarity, which is the Google Privacy Sandbox case. So this originated from the announcement in January 2020 by Google that it would not allow websites to use third-party cookies in Chrome. So basically the idea is that these cookies are extremely valuable, of course, to advertisers and to publishers, because in this way they are going to look at what the users are going to do after having left their web page. This means that they will be able to better target the advertising for the users. Okay, and so this is extremely valuable for advertisers and for publishers. And at some point, basically, Google said that this is not possible anymore on Chrome. And you might have, of course, two very different explanations for this. One was Google's explanation, which is that this was to improve the privacy experience of users. And this is, I don't know, the optimistic, explanation for what they did. And then there is another one, which I could call the pessimistic explanation for that, which is that since Google has, in any case, data about what users are doing, and it's able to track them because they can see what, if you are using Chrome or if you are on Android, they can see what you are doing. Basically, what happened is that in this way, the rivals in the advertising market, in the online advertising market, could not follow users, but Google could still do it. Okay. And this is clearly what worried the Competition and Markets Authority, which decided to intervene and to look better into this case. And the case was closed in February 2022, when the CMA accepted commitments by Google that basically would submit itself to the same sort of treatment that they would submit to the others. And the CMA also has obliged Google to let a monitoring trustee to look at what Google does and to check whether there is compliance with the obligations. This is interesting because it might, I think we were talking before, we were talking about the DMA. Personally, I think that I'm very positive about the DMA. But one of the issues is how they are going to enforce and to check certain of the obligations, including, for instance, obligations which are look like this one. And so perhaps this is also, I mean, I know that it's in the UK, not in Europe, but perhaps it would be interesting to see from this experience whether it is indeed possible to really, be able to make sure that there is a compliance with these rules. Just for completeness, Apple introduced a very similar policy to Google, and it's the so-called app tracking transparency, which by and large is doing the same. That is, before that, what happened is that it's the users had to opt out if they don't want to be tracked, and after this, basically they have to opt in. And you know that defaults are very important. So basically, this also means that there will be less access to data about for advertisers, etc. But of course, so again here you have two possible views. One is that Apple did it in order to strengthen its image of a company which is very conscious and respectful of the privacy rights of people. And on the other hand, you have the more, say, pessimistic view, which is that perhaps they intended to help its own advertising business. You could do the same, of course, for Google and for Apple, except that basically most of the monetization of Google comes from advertising revenues. And in the case of Apple, the advertising revenue are much more limited. So my impression is that I believe that in the case of Apple, you know, probably the privacy rationale was much more important. But you know, the French and the German antitrust authorities have opened investigation about this because also what you know, clearly there is a strategy by both Apple and Amazon to monetize more through advertising. And without entering into the details of this picture, but basically, you know, this is you know, the growth of a particular type of share of ads which are sold by Apple. So here are all the market, inverted commas, we are talking about is all iPhone app downloads, which results from clicking on an advertising. And so basically within 1 year, Apple went up from say 17% to basically 60%. What we are talking about is this, that is when you are in App Store and you digit something like game, or you make that specific you are looking for a specific game because you want to download a particular app, what happens is that you will see on top of your page an ad, okay? And if you then click on this one, then what happens is that Apple would monetize. Of course, you can also have other elsewhere, you can have other ads for app downloads, but basically the point is that Apple was able to increase very rapidly its advertising revenue due to this policy. I find this case also interesting because it is true that Apple might indeed have benefited, and so from this point of view, it could be indeed another case of self-preferencing. On the other hand, you know, academically, there is also another interesting question, which is it really bad that Apple enters a market in which you know, Google and Facebook are by far the leading companies? Perhaps if Apple and Amazon also enter this market, might eventually be a good thing, because it would stimulate competition. I leave it at that. I don't want to pursue this line. It's probably more provocative than needed. Another case that I wanted to mention is Apple Music. And here we are not talking about monetization through advertising anymore. As I will clarify, we are talking about a different type of constraint which comes from a business model which is completely different. So let me introduce a little bit to this case. Again, what I know about the case is basically 2 press releases by the European Commission, and you know, there is a web page by Spotify, which is www.timetoplayfair.com. Okay, so in which basically what Spotify does is to list a number of claims about anti-competitive practices. You know, that obviously that's the claims of Spotify that Apple has supposedly been involved into. So, and in particular, Spotify complains about the fact that they have to pay a 30% fee for, you know, every subscription to Spotify Premium on the App Store, and this, I would say, it's a one category. And then there is a series of other things, which is like, frequently rejecting the Spotify app, changing arbitrarily the App Store guidelines, rejecting the Spotify app for Apple Watch, and preventing Spotify from sending promotional push notifications, and in general, basically, not to have data about their users. Okay, so to me, the 30% fee belongs to one category, which is probably exploitative abuse, if anything, and then the rest is closer to what I would define as degradation of access, delay of interoperability, call it as you want, but they are all forms of basically partial foreclosure. Okay, so this is what interests me in this particular case. Basically what you can see that there is here again there is integration. Apple Music is the downstream rival, but obviously Apple is the one which has the App Store, and Spotify and others are the rivals to Apple Music. So the European Commission issued a first statement of objection roughly 2 years ago. And this is a 102 case. And they, at the beginning, they were focusing both on the 30% commission fee of Apple, and then they were focusing their attention on the so-called anti-steering provisions. Anti-steering provisions comes from the fact that Spotify wanted basically to tell users when they are, they are looking for the Spotify Premium in an iPhone, basically they want to tell users where, you can buy the app at a higher price if you stay on the App Store, but if you link here or if you come to our website, you are going to pay less, okay? And Apple's rule is that you cannot, if you are a software developer and you want to be on the App Store, you may not do this type of announcing. So you cannot steer users away from the App Store. So, and the European Commission is also paid attention to this second theory of harm. And what is interesting also is that at least in the first statement of objection, what they say also, which is more related to the foreclosure story that we are talking about, is that related to the anti-steering provisions is the fact that basically software developers do not have access about their clients. So what happens is that, given that you have to pass through the App Store, what happens is that you do not have information about your users, those who are using Spotify, which means that, among other things, that you cannot communicate with them, you cannot send the promotional stuff to them, and if they are not going to renew their subscription, you would not even be able to go back to them and try to get them back one way or the other. Less than 1 month ago, the European Commission issued a second statement of objection, or a revised statement of objection, in which they are just focusing on the anti-steering obligation. It's not clear to me whether in the press release they don't say whether they conceive this as an exploitative abuse only, that is, it's only about depriving consumers of their choice. The wording seems to be more of exploitative abuse, but arguably there might be also this exclusionary component that I have mentioned here. So what has to do this with imperfect rent extraction? So let me tell you a way in which I would rationalize what is happening here. And this is true for for Apple, but it also applies, in my view, to Amazon. So if you have a situation in which you have a platform and you have certain apps, or you have, say, the marketplace and a number of merchants, then you have to decide what are the rules of access to the apps and to the software, for the software developers or for the merchants to the platform or to the marketplace. So, what happens is that both Apple and Amazon are using a remarkably uniform set of terms of access here. So think, for instance, of Apple basically is, for non-digital apps is 0, but for digital services is 30%. Okay, that you have to pay. It's an ad valorem fee that you have to pay. In the case of Amazon, there is slightly more variance according to different types of product, but also there is remarkably uniform. And you can explain, in my view, the uniformity from 2 points of view. One is the fact that, we are not talking about an old industry in which you have a vertically integrated firm which has 2, 3, or 4 downstream firms which are asking for access. Here we are talking about a situation in which you might have thousands, literally, of software developers which might want to be on the App Store, thousands of merchants which want to be on the Amazon marketplace. So what happens is that, it would be very difficult and time-consuming to do a bespoke offer to each of them. So it makes sense, also to have, uniformity from the point of view of saving transaction costs. But there is also something more than that. That is, what happens is that there is also another incentive to commit to uniform terms of access. Because what happens is that, imagine that you are a software developer and you knew that from one day to the other, Apple can change the terms of access, then you would be very worried, because you know that if you are going to be successful, then what happens is that Apple might actually increase the fees that is going to ask and expropriate you much more out of that. So I think that ex ante makes a lot of sense for a company like Apple to commit to a certain uniform term or a certain uniform price equal for everybody, and not to change that. This is ex ante, and because what happens is that otherwise the software developers would be scared. But ex post, what happens is that Apple or Amazon might actually realize that they are losing a lot of money by the fact that they have committed to these ex ante uniform fees, and so they might realize, for instance, that there is a lot of money to be made in the music distribution apps, etc. So they look at Spotify, see that they make a lot of money, and say, well, we might want to increase our share of the money to be made there. So here, what happens is that Apple or Amazon might then have an incentive to have their own copycat version of this, to enter themselves into this market. And offering their own version of the product of rivals, say the fact that they offer Apple Music, is not a bad thing by itself. But what happens next is that once they have their own version, then they might want to increase the cost for the rivals, because in that case, what happens is that they can appropriate even more rent. Okay, so what, in my opinion, might happen here is that after copying and that after entering with their own copycat version, they would have an incentive to degrade the interoperability and to favor their own version of the product or services to the detriment of the others. And what is important in my view is to underline the fact that it's not the fact that they are entering, the platform is entering the market downstream itself that is problematic, but is the fact that if after they are doing that, if they are degrading interoperability of their rivals, this is where the problem lies. Okay, so this was basically under the first category of theory of harm, so imperfect rents extraction. And let me turn to the second category, which is dynamic vertical foreclosure. Okay, I told you before that this is basically the starting point of the Chicago School. So there is a vertically integrated firm, and the vertically integrated firm would not have an incentive to exclude this company here, provided that it has a way to extract enough rents from this company. So assume that this is the case. Okay, so assume that in the current period, this is indeed the case, and that indeed there is enough money to be made that from a static perspective is indeed better to have this company and extract rents from this company than to exclude it. However, what happens is that the future might be different. That is, it might be that if this company is successful today, then what happens is that either itself or by supporting another company, there might be entry upstream. And this is, something that the platform or the upstream firm wants to avoid, because if there was upstream entry, or if it was entry by another platform, then what happens is that the main source of profits, which is from the fact that they have this monopolistic position in the input, basically would disappear. And this is basically what I am talking about now. So a situation in which if you are not able, if the vertically integrated firm is not able to exclude a downstream rival, then what happens is that this downstream rival will basically sponsor entry upstream or enter itself upstream. And this is a story that I'm sure that most, if not all of you, have already heard in a slightly different version, which is the Microsoft case from the late 90s, where what happens was that this was the theory of harm of the Department of Justice, where what happened was that Microsoft had the monopoly or monopoly power in the operating system through Windows. And what happened was that they basically wanted to exclude Netscape. Netscape was, Netscape Navigator was the leading company at some point in the browser market. And Microsoft entered with Internet Explorer. It engaged in a number of practices, including exclusivity payments to original equipment manufacturers, including Time and others, to exclude Netscape. Why? Well, not because they were interested in the browser market by itself, but because Netscape was supporting a programming language, Java, which could have developed into a middleware, which could have basically allowed the users to bypass Windows and allow them to use, Word, PowerPoint, etc., without the need of resorting of having to buy Windows. Okay, so this is very much the same story. Okay, why am I telling you all this? Because I think that this fits very well to at least a couple of cases. The first one is the case involving Facebook. And in particular, I'm referring here to the FTC complaint towards Facebook. So what happens is that in the FTC complaint, there were basically three strands of in the complaint. One was the acquisition of Instagram. The second one was the acquisition of WhatsApp. And the third one was the interoperability clauses that they were imposing to software developers in order to for them to have access to the Facebook platform. Okay, so what happens is that there are a number of apps which are interoperable with the Facebook platforms, and basically what Facebook did was that it made them available only on the condition that they would refrain from competing from Facebook's core services, i.e., the social network of Facebook, or from connecting with other social networks. Okay, so that was basically the idea, and not only they had these clauses, but they also enforce them very, very fiercely. There are a number of examples which are given by the FTC in its complaints. Here I'm mentioning 3 of these apps which at some point they were foreclosed: Path, Circle, and Vine. They had, and you can see that also from the documentary evidence in the complaint of the FTC, that basically what Facebook was worried about was these apps which had some social networking functionalities and the mobile messaging apps. And it's by no coincidence that they had been worried about Instagram on one count and WhatsApp on the other, because they perceived that it was very much possible for those apps with these functionalities to basically compete with Facebook. So basically, this is the idea. That the idea is that at some point, these other apps, would just be a complement, and Facebook would have all the interest in static terms to have them there, because this increases the value of the social network of Facebook, because people can interact in different ways and they have additional services in Facebook. But what they were worried about is that then at some point, these apps would actually become a rival social network. And again, this is basically the reason why they wanted to acquire Instagram and WhatsApp, as it is evident from the evidence which has been collected by the FTC. So basically, this is why they decided that they didn't want to allow interoperability to this, not because they didn't want them in the short term, as I explained, but because they were afraid that otherwise they would have either themselves or they would have sponsored others. Let me skip this, which is of interest probably for the economists in the room. So let me skip this, which is the fact that it's about what is new about this with respect to the economic literature. And let me go to the following case, which is another case which has been which is very, very recent. Actually, the CMA ran this market study on mobile ecosystems, directed to Apple and Google. And in that context, what happens is that they found enough material to be worried about some practices of Apple, and because of that, they have opened a market investigation on mobile browsers and cloud gaming. So let me try and explain what I have understood of this, and this is not a this is an area in which I have difficulties to understand how the market works and what the technology is about. But just to summarize, the browser. So basically, there are two types of browser. There is the browser that we are using, all the browsers which allow us to navigate and to see the websites in which we are interested. And then there is another browser or browser engine behind the scenes, which I quote is basically the technology which is used to transform the source code of a web page into content that then the users can engage with. Okay, and what happens is that for this type of browser engine, nobody can use their own browser engine. They are obliged to use Apple's WebKit browser engine. And basically in this way, what happens is that Apple has control about what software developers can do and what they can show. And in particular, according to the provisional findings of the CMA or the allegations that now they are investigating, what happens is that this has effectively blocked some types of services, and in particular, cloud gaming apps and web apps. So here, cloud gaming services are basically eliminating the need to basically to have a good mobile terminal, a good mobile phone, etc., and to pass by the App Store, because what happens is that you can bypass the App Store and go directly to the web in order to play your games. And similarly for the web apps, which basically are like apps, just that they are not on the, you don't need to download them from the App Store, but you can go directly to the web in order to use these apps. So effectively, this reminds me very much to the Microsoft Netscape kind of story, because it seems really that here, what Apple seems to be worried about is the possibility of disintermediation. That is, instead of having to pass by through the App Store, what happens is that users might go directly to the web to do whatever they want. So to me, this is a very similar story. Let me, don't ask me the details of the technology though. I think it's a similar thing in the sense that apparently these web apps and these other additional services are not that developed. And therefore, so they might exist today, but they are not so well known and so developed. And in the future, there might be even more. So that is my understanding. 3 minutes. Okay, so I will just conclude with another case still about dynamic vertical foreclosure, and then I will skip instead the part on rising rivals cost. This is a case on which which is inspiring some work that I'm doing with Professor Peitz, who is here as well. And this is about the NLX versus Google case. So this is a case of denial of interoperability in the sense that there is this company which is called NLX, which is a subsidiary of Enel, which is the biggest company in Italy. It's an energy company. NLX had developed an app which is called the Juice Pass. And what NLX wanted was for Juice Pass to be available on Android Auto. Okay, and why did they want to have it in Android Auto? Because what happens is that Juice Pass offers a range of services which are related to recharging electric vehicles. So, and in particular, it allows to find a charging station, to reserve your place at the station, to manage the charging session, and then also to pay at the end. Okay, so a number of services that Google, and in particular Google Maps, is not offering yet. Okay, and Google didn't want to allow Juice Pass to have access in Android Auto. And the case, I think it's interesting because what happens here is that basically there is this is a long 400 pages in the Italian Antitrust Authority decision, and then 150 pages in the TAR, which is the Court of First Instance in Italy, which has fully upheld the Italian Antitrust Authority decision. But so our reading of this is the following. Basically, it's true that Google is not active in this market today. So here, it's not here. Okay, so there is it's just the platform is Android Auto, and then you have this complementary service. But from what you see from the documents and from what the court and the antitrust agency says, apparently there is a very high likelihood that if they will enter downstream in the future. And so what happens is that there is the worry by Google that if Juice Pass is particularly successful today and it achieves a very strong customer base today, then what happens tomorrow is that I will have a competitive advantage with respect to Google Maps if Google Maps wants to enter into the same space as the antitrust agency and the court wants to do it. And it is for this reason that they prefer to exclude it. That is to basically to protect its competitive position in the future. And what is particularly interesting here is that there is a discussion about the fact that this is a situation in which network effects also has a value in terms of the data that you would develop. What happens is that the more data you would have, the more information you would have about consumers and what consumers want, etc. And as a result, you would offer a better product in the future, and this is what Google would like to avoid. Okay, so let me just close here. So basically what I tried to do here was just to run through a number of cases involving the digital platforms and to try and find the anti-competitive rationale for what might have been behind these practices. Perhaps one way to finish this is that which is very unlikely what we academics trying to do is try to say, oh, I've done something which is novel, I've done something which is very original, etc. I actually don't think so. I think that these are well-established theories of harm. You just need basically to understand a little bit the facts of the case in order to fit these theories of harm, to the facts of the case. This is just a different way to say that actually, we have out there, a toolkit which is available to understand what these digital platforms are trying to do when they engage in that content, in that type of content. Thank you very much for your attention.